Okay.
We are, yeah, we're, but inshallah in 5 seconds we're going live. We're live.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Inshallah, in today's talk, we will cover the topic of Daleel or evidence. What does it mean by Daleel in Islam, and what does it linguistically mean? So linguistically, Daleel means a proof or indication or evidence. And as a term, Daleel means a source or evidence for a thought, concept, or ruling. Any law or ruling must have a Daleel, which can be from the sources of Islam, which are Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, Sahaba, and Qiyas. And Ijma, Sahaba, and Qiyas, when we talk about it, these are directly from the Quran and Sunnah itself. And inshallah, when it comes to the sources of evidences or sources of the Daleel, we will talk about that next week, inshallah. But today, our focus will be more on the subject of Daleel. What is a Daleel? So, for example, when we were discussing the topic of the Qarina and the different types of Hukum Shari, we talked about that. For example, this is an obligation for us to have a group that works for the protection of Islam, for the spreading of Islam, and whose job is to amar bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. Now, for that, the evidence is from the Quran. So this will be considered, for example, the ayah that says, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. This ayah itself is considered as a daleel, as an evidence from the Quran that is directing us to have a group whose job is to enjoin the good and forbid the evil and call people towards Islam. Okay. So that's one form of evidence. And then we can see other form of evidence, for example, in Islam, calling for asabiyah, which is nationalism, racism, tribalism. These kind of isms is prohibited in Islam. Now, one can say that it is prohibited, but he has to prove it from a daleel from Islam, from the Quran and the Sunnah, or the other sources which are ijma, sahaba, and qiyas. Now, when it is said that nationalism or racism is haram in Islam, what is an evidence could be multiple evidences. For here, just for the sake of simplicity, we are mentioning one of the evidences for the prohibition. When the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrated by Muslim that says, "Da'uha fa innaha muntahna," that leave it, for it is something, and it here is actually referring to asabiyah, for it is something disgusting, something which is not allowed. So that is an evidence from the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So as we said, there are four sources of evidences, which is Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, Sahaba, and Qiyas. Now, moving on to the structure of the Daleel. So when we talk about the Daleel, actually there are two aspects of a Daleel. First one is called a riwayah or reportage, meaning that covers the issue related to how the information was relayed to us, which includes the numbers and integrity of its reporters. When we talk about the reports also, when it comes to the reports of the hadith, inshallah, that's a separate topic, and that will be discussed later on. But today we're just targeting, our focus is Daleel itself. So one aspect of Daleel is the reportage, is the riwayah, and the other part is called a dalala, or the meaning of the text of the Daleel, meaning whether it's coming from the Quran or the Sunnah or Ijma, Sahaba, whatever the text is, we look at actually it's the Quran and the Sunnah, whatever the text is, we will look into it, whether the meaning of the text is qat'i, which is which means it's definite, or dhanni, which means it is indefinite, or it's the opposite of qat'i. As we see, you can see the bottom of the slide that says there are two terms used in connection with a riwayah and a dalala, meaning the reportage and the meaning. So when it comes to the reportage itself, that can be qat'i. Qat'i means it's definite, meaning if it's from Allah Azza wa Jal, it is definite, it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When it's coming from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then the report is definitely from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now, when it comes to the dalala, the meaning, whatever the text or the nas is, we will look into that and see that if the meaning is qat'i, or the meaning is dhanni, which is the opposite of qat'i. Qat'i means decisive, conclusive, or definite, while dhanni means qat'i, it's the opposite of qat'i, meaning if it does not conclude in a conclusive manner, decisive manner, then it will be considered as non-definite meaning, or it has speculations, or it has indecisiveness. Okay, so these are the two kinds of, this is the structure of the daleel. Now, when we go to the reportage, any ayah from the Quran or hadith mutawatir is considered as qat'i. Qat'i means it's conclusive. So the whole Quran, every ayah of the Quran is conclusive, meaning as far as the reportage goes, it is conclusive. There is no doubt that it is from Allah Azza wa Jal. This is the Quran that was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was reported back to us generations through generations. And we will go a bit of more detail when we talk about the Quran itself. Similarly, when we are saying hadith mutawatir means this hadith has been reported by so many chains that it takes away all sorts of doubt, or it makes it conclusive that this hadith is from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And inshallah, when we'll go into more detail regarding what is hadith mutawatir and how the classifications of the hadith works, it will become more clear. So for now, we'll just remember that the Quran as a whole is conclusive when it comes to the reporting of the Quran, and the hadith mutawatir, the hadith which is reported by multiple chains in a manner that the doubt has been taken away, or it is conclusive that it is from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the part of the reported, and the one that makes it qat'i, the Quran as a whole, every ayah is qat'i. When it comes to the hadith, the hadith mutawatir, one of the categories of the hadith, they are for sure from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's a conclusiveness here. We're not saying that the other hadith are not important. Other hadith besides the mutawatir is also taken for ahkam, extracting the ahkam of the rulings in Islam. Okay, now the qat'i riwayah implies that the evidence is authentic without any shadow of doubt. This authenticity is established based on the methodology of transmission. And as I said, we will talk about the methodology of transmission of the Quran, and we will talk about the methodology of transmission of the ahadith as well. We just want to take this away from today's talk, that a riwayah can be qat'i and the riwayah can be dhanni. But when it comes to the, if you look at this small table of 4 things mentioned here, so when it comes to the Quran as a whole is qat'i. When it comes to reportage of the Quran, it's conclusive. Okay, there is no dhan. So this, you don't see the column of dhan in front of the Quran mention anything. It's empty here. Now, when it comes to the hadith mutawatir, so hadith mutawatir is something that is conclusive from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam beyond any the shadow of doubt, like the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says, "Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar." That the hadith says, "Whosoever lies about me deliberately, let him take his place in the hellfire." This hadith is reported by Muslim and many other books of the hadith as well. And this hadith is mutawatir, meaning it is reported by multiple chains. And I'm using the word multiple chain here instead of giving a number. And we will talk about that, what does it mean by a number here, but I'm just saying enough number of chains that takes the doubt away, any kind of a doubt a way that it can have any kind of mixing in the hadith. So for sure, this hadith is from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. Now, when it comes to dhanni, for example, the ahad ahadith. So there are two categories of the ahadith. One is called mutawatir, other is called ahad. Now, I am not going into the issue of here sahih, hasan, and da'if, just to be very clear. I am just talking about from the reportage perspective. From reportage perspective or riwayah, hadith can be categorized into two different categories, mutawatir and ahad. Ahad is the hadith by reportage. It is dhanni because it has not reached the level of tawatur that makes the hadith conclusive in reportage. Like for example, the hadith that we just mentioned in the previous slide, when Rasulullah said, "Da'uha fa innaha muntina," that leave it, it is rotten. Now, this hadith, even though it carries the meaning of as being haram, the asabiyya, or tribalism, racism, and the hadith is muttafaq alayhi as well, is reported by Bukhari and Muslim, but still it did not reach the level of tawatur that enough number of chains, unique chains, have reported the hadith that can make this hadith as mutawatir. So this hadith will still be taken, and this hadith will be used for the purpose of extracting the rules, and hence we said that it is in Islam, asabiyah is not allowed. Okay, so that's about the riwayah. Now I'll move to the dalala. But before I move to dalala, I just want to make sure if there is any question about the part of the about the reportage or what is a daleel, inshallah, we'll try to answer here. And if in the next minute or so I don't hear any hand raised or questions that have been written, I'll continue on. So I'll take a pause for a minute and let me know if there is any question about the subject that's covered so far. And I believe for the Zoom, mic is open, and for the other places, they can write the questions in the chat room. Okay. Okay, so you don't see any questions in the chat or YouTube, right, brother?
Yeah, no questions
Continue
so far. On. Yeah, please continue.
Okay. Okay. When it comes to dalala, the meaning, I have to move this Zoom thing is coming and blocking me. Okay. When it comes to the meaning or the dalala means the meaning. Okay. And I think I went to one. Sorry, have to be here. Okay. The second aspect of the daleel is called dalala, and if the text of the hadith or hadith mutawatir or hadith ahad is clear. See, these are the three categories we talk about. Quran itself by reported is just one Quran. And when it comes to the reportage of the hadith, is hadith mutawatir or hadith ahad. Now, if we look at these three things, if the meaning is clear, specific, and has only one meaning, in that case, we will consider that meaning of the hadith as conclusive, or call it qat'i. Now, if the text is not qat'i, okay, or the text of the daleel has to have, so if it's not qat'i, where even though it is from the qat'i reportage, meaning from the riwayah, i.e. it is from the Quran or hadith mutawatir or a hadith ahad, whichever one it is, if the meaning is not one unique meaning, that I can have more than one interpretation, then it will be considered as dhanni. Now, and this interpretation can be because of the Arabic language, and any interpretation has to be justified through the Arabic language, by the way. Now, and the language where we talk about is not that we will talk about the language. If today somebody changes the meaning of the word and says, no, from now on, I'm going to have the meaning of this word like this, that will not be considered as the meaning from the Arabic language. We talk about the meaning that is used in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the language the Quran was revealed in. Okay. So now, when we look at the dalala or the meaning of the Quran and the Sunnah, we see there are multiple categories. When it comes to the Quran with one meaning, that will be considered as it has conclusive or qat'i dalala. Okay. Similarly, hadith mutawatir that has one meaning, that will be considered as still the meaning dalala wise is qat'i. We're not talking about the reportage right now. Now we're only talking about the meaning. Now, if the hadith is ahad, which is the opposite of mutawatir, even though by reportage it is dhanni, but if the meaning is conclusive, we still call that, as far as the dalala or the meaning goes, this hadith is qat'i. Now, Quran, the ayat, which can be, even though Quran is conclusive by reportage, but there could be ayat or verses or the words within the ayat that can have more than one meaning, then that ayah or the word can be considered as dhanni. Now, same goes for hadith mutawatir and same goes for hadith ahad. Okay, so and inshallah, this presentation we will upload it, so it will be easy to refer back to. Okay, now let's move on to the examples of these 6 categories that we talked about here in this table. Okay, now as far as it goes for the dalala or the meaning of the Quran that has only one meaning, then an example is like this. If you look at this ayah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ وَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَلَكُمْ مَرُبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْنَا. Here, Allah Azza wa Jal is talking about inheritance. And inheritance it says that you belong half, and to you belong half of whatever has left behind by your wives. So if a woman dies and her husband is one of the inheritors behind her, in the case that she does not leave any kid behind, then husband will inherit half of her wealth. But if there are children, then he will inherit 1/4 of the wealth of the wife. Now, as you can see here, when it comes to the proportions mentioned in the inheritance, half and 1/4 are very exact numbers. Half means half. Half does not mean 1/3 or 1/4 or 1/5 or whatever other number. Half means 50%. And 1/4 is a very specific targeted number, which is 25% of the wealth that has been left behind by the wife. So hence, the meaning here is conclusive, is qat'i. It cannot have any other meaning but what is mentioned by the ayah. Similarly, when Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ الْمُحْصِنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَأْتُوا بِأَرْبَعَةٍ شُهَدَاءَ فَاجْلِدُوهُمْ 80 جلدة ولا تقبلوا لهم شهادة أبدا وأولئك هم الفاسقون. Here Allah Azza wa Jalla is talking about those who accuse chaste women and produce not 4 witnesses. Flog them with 80 stripes. Now, here, when we talk about the number of witnesses, it's very clear, talking about 4 witnesses. When it talks about the number of stripes that's supposed to be hit, in the case they do not produce the witnesses which Islam is asking for, it is very exact number. It cannot be understood other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in this ayah. Okay. All right, so now if we move to the next slide, next example, which is for, this is a qat'i meaning still, or the qat'i dalala, and it is from the hadith mutawatir. I mean, hadith mutawatir means this hadith is, as I already talked about, there's no doubt in the reportage. Now when it comes to the meaning, in this hadith, when Rasulullah says, "Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar," whosoever lies about me deliberately, then him take his place in the hellfire. Now here it is very clear about there's no other meaning. Somebody is lying on behalf of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning he's saying something knowingly that he knows Rasulullah did not say it, and he is making it up something on behalf of Rasulullah. then the hadith is saying then he will have a seat in the hellfire. So now this hadith is supported by so many chains that there is no doubt that this is what Rasulullah said. And if this is what Rasulullah said, as we know, and it has only one meaning, in that case, that person will be in the hellfire if he does that action, which is mentioned in the hadith. Now, the other one is the example of, again, the qat'i, meaning it is decisive as far as the dalala goes, meaning goes, but the reportage is ahad. So now, for example, but it has only one meaning, not necessarily the whole hadith, but part of it. Like the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, hadith reported by Imam Muslim. It says, "Man sama Ramadan, ثم اتبعه ستا من شوال كان كصيام الدهر." The hadith, the meaning of the hadith is, this hadith is reported by Abu Ayyub Ansari radiyallahu anh, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever fasts during the month of Ramadan and then follows with 6 days of Shawwal will be rewarded as if he had fasted the entire year. Now, what are the conclusive meaning the qat'i meaning here in this hadith? Number one, the permissibility of fasting 6 days in the Shawwal, except the one on the first day of the Shawwal, since it is the day of the Eid and it is haram to fast on this. So when it comes to the 6 days in Shawwal, the permissibility of that part, this is very clear and conclusive. There's no other meaning of 6 days than 6 days of Shawwal, excluding the first day because of the other hadith that mentions that. So that's the conclusive meaning out of this hadith. Now, when it comes to the Quran with dhanni meanings, meaning it can have more than one meaning. So when we look at the ayah where Allah Azza wa Jal is talking about the wudu and the tayammum. Now, the hadith, the ayah that Rasulullah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Surah Al-Ma'idah, that it starts up with يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. So this is the wudu that has been mentioned, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned how to make wudu. So this is not the part that is that we are talking about here. Now, the latter part, the hadith ayah continues on. It says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُبًا فَاتَّهَّرُوا. Now here it says, if you have janaba, if you had a sexual discharge, that requires you basically to be tahir again, to clean yourself, and that's for that you have to do the ghusl. Now the ayah continues on, and it talks about the state of traveling. And you don't find water, for example. So then that allows us to do tayammum for cleanliness. Now it says that وَإِن كُنْتُمْ مَرْضَىٰ أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ أَوْ جَاءَ أَحَدٌ مِنْكُمْ مِنَ الْغَائِطِ أَوْ لَمَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ مِنْهُ. Meaning, he's saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that, and if one of you is uses the bathroom, for example, or he lamastumun nisa, meaning touches the woman, and he does not find water, then you do tayammum from the clean soil or the dirt. And then the method of tayammum is mentioned here, that you use a masah of the face and بوجوهكم وأيديكم, and your arms. Now here, when it's talking about lamastum nisa, that if you touch the woman, then what does it mean by lamastum? Lamastum means touching the woman. Now, some of the fuqaha, they understood here touching means literal touch. If a man touches the woman, that breaks his wudu. Now others, which probably is the more accurate meaning, that here the touch means actually the sexual intercourse with a woman, and that actually requires a ghusl. But if you don't find water, in that case tayammum is enough. In the case you are traveling or the place you are at, there's no water available, in that case tayammum is enough for getting the tahara. So now, but the point here is, that touch here can be interpreted in more than one meaning. Hence, the meaning of this ayah here is considered as dhanni. Okay. Now, move on to the example of dhanni, the dhanni meaning, but with hadith mutawatir, meaning non-definitive meaning with the hadith which is mutawatir. Now, one of the hadith which is mentioned about the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding taking off his ihram in a specific manner. Now, the hadith is reported by many chains of tawatur. However, when Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they told Rasulullah that they took it off in a different manner from the way Sallallahu took it off. Rasulullah approved of their actions, though this incident, though this incident is a mutawatir, the rules to take off one's ihram are many. Since there are many ways of taking the ihram off, which means that it has more than one meaning, the hadith which is mentioned here. Hence, even though the hadith is mutawatir, it can carry a non-definitive meaning. Now, moving on to a hadith example with a non-definitive meaning or dhanni meaning. The hadith of Rasulullah that we just talked about a couple of slides prior to this one, where we use the same hadith for definitive meaning. Now we're going to use the very same hadith because a certain part of the hadith are non-definitive, meaning that the hadith that I'm referring to is about man sama Ramadan ثم تبعه ستا من شوال كان كصيام الدهر, that whosoever fasts the month of Ramadan and then follows up with 6 days in the Shawwal, it is as if he has fasted the whole year. Now, the definitive meaning was, we talked about previously, was 6 days of Shawwal, except the first day of the Shawwal, because it's Eid and it's haram to fast on the Eid day. Now, what are the non-definitive meaning? Non-definitive or dhanni meaning here are, which 6 days of the fasting, are they supposed to be consecutive back to back, or can they be sparse or separated by days in between? That's the one part which is dhanni. Second part which is dhanni is fasting in which part of the Shawwal. Should it be right away in the beginning, or all 6 together, or should that be at the end or in the middle, or where? So that part is dhanni, and this is where we may find that fuqaha they differ in the meaning of the hadith. Hence, they may end up with differences of opinions here. And inshallah, when we understand these things, why dalala can have a meaning, there can be multiple meanings of the ayah or the hadith, and the reportage, we have to look into it, whether it's ahad or mutawatir. Then we have another point to look at why we see there are differences of opinions among the fuqaha, and they're all within the framework of Islam, hence they are Islamic opinions. And inshallah, when we talk about how to deal with difference of opinion, that will help us to understand why we say that. Okay. Okay, before I go to this now, if these are the 6 meanings of 6 different categories of the dalala. If there is any questions or comments, inshallah, I'll try to answer this now. Otherwise, I will move on again to the next couple of slides that I need to cover today. So please do let me know if there's any question, or if there's something is not clear, needs more clarity.
Looks like no questions. We can continue.
We'll continue on.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we talked about riwayatu qat'iyya and dalalatu qat'iyya, meaning riwayah which is definite, and the meaning or the dalala which is definite. And also we talk about riwayah which is the niyyah or hadhan, or the dalala that has done. Now, the brothers and sisters who are aware of the things like, when we do a truth table with conjunction or and, or this is more of a, yeah, if it with the and, then this is what the table looks like actually there. But anyways, just to make it clear what we're talking about is this: if the dalil is or the riwayah is qat'i, and if you of any ayah or the hadith, and the report or the dalala and the meaning of that ayah and hadith is also qat'i, definite, then the dalil itself as a whole will be considered as qat'i dalil. Okay, so that will be dalil qat'i. Now, if the riwayah is qat'i, okay, but the meaning or dalala is dhanni. So end of dhanni and qat'i will result into the dalil which is also considered as dhanni. Okay, so any of these two, whether the dalala or riwayah, either one of them had done or both of them have inconclusiveness, then the dalil will consider as inconclusive as well. We will consider as dhanni. Now, so second one, we see that even though report can be qat'i, but if the meaning is dhanni, then the dalil will consider as dhanni. Let me use this pen. That may help. Highlighter. No, not highlighter. Okay. So if the, let me see, if this is, okay, qat'i, the riwayah, and so is the meaning, then we see that the dalil is considered as qat'i. On contrary to that, in the rest of the three groups that we are seeing, see, in this case, we see here, there's a dhan, the dalat dhanniya. So there is a dhanni dalal meaning. Or in this case, here it is dhan. So both cases, we see we ended up with dalil is dhanni also. Okay? And if both are dhanni, of course, then dalil is dhanni anyways. So this is what I mean by that. Okay, so now any idea, thought, or concept which is related to aqidah, because this is the basis upon of our deen. So it has to be based on which is qat'i dalil. Dalil meaning that whatever we're taking, whether it's from for reportage wise or meaning wise, both have to be qat'i. Similarly, when we talk about usul al-fiqh, because now everything will be extracted from those usul, those principles, then they have to be, the sources of usul, they also have to be qat'i dalil, meaning the reported and the meaning both have to be qat'i. Okay? Okay. Now, as an example, to consider ijma sahaba, consider sahaba as a source of ruling, the dalil to prove the authority of ijma sahaba has to be qat'i, both in riwayah and dalala. Though a ruling can be derived from either qat'i or dhanni dalil. See, let's not get confused. I'm just talking about the sources here. So ijma sahaba itself is ijma sahaba has to be qat'i, that it's a source. A Quran has to be qat'i, that is a source. A hadith of Rasulullah is a qat'i thing, that it is a source, can be. Similarly, the qiyas. So the evidences that are used to say that these are the sources to be used, those evidences, those dalail have to be qat'i. Okay, so that's what it means by that. Okay, now.
So there is one question, if you want to take a look at it in the chat.
There is a question, you're saying?
Yeah, there was one question. I think there is a delay on the YouTube, 15-20 second.
Okay. So
there is one question if you want to take a look at that before you move on.
That's fine. Can you explain with example the riwayah for hadith and the Quran? Okay. So, for example, when and it's talking about reportage, right? Riwayah, yeah. So when we talk about the Quran, the way the Quran was has reached us. It is by generations through generations. The whole generation of the Sahaba, they agreed upon the Quran that they had from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there is no doubt here that all the Sahaba, every one of them, agreed to have corruption in the Quran. Okay, so we're talking about the whole generation. None of them disagreed that what is supposed to be Quran. And when, inshallah, as I said, when we talk about the Quran itself, inshallah, probably next week, we will start discussing that subject as well in a little bit more detail, how the Quran was compiled, collected, the copies that were written in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how the witnesses were taken, and then it was converted into a mushaf, and the multiple copies were made. So we'll talk about that to clarify that. But the way it was collected and is reported back to us until today, generations through generations have passed the Quran, the exact same copy of the Quran. There is no doubt in the any of the verse of the Quran that that's part of the Quran or not. Okay, so that's the part of the Quran. When it comes to the Hadith, as I mentioned, Hadith was they were even though they were memorized and written in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not all the Hadith were written, but memory was one of the tools, but normal tool of that time. And those Hadith were reported to next generation by different Sahaba. And then the Tabi'in, the next generation, reported to the following generation, which is Taba Tabi'in. And then the Muhaddithin came in and they started collecting the Hadith, and they went through the whole life. I mean, they went through the personalities of the people who were reporting in each level of the reporting. And then they accepted or rejected the Hadith based on that, the strength of the chain of those people. And inshallah, that part also we will talk about later. But what happens is when the Hadith is collected like that, and it was collected or compiled, especially from the memory or even from the writing, there is a chance that a person may have added or subtracted, because Hadith was not written the way the Quran was written in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because Quran was dictated by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Sahaba. There were specific people, katibin wahi, the writers or transcribers of the wahi of the Quran, the Rasulullah appointed, and they used to write and they used to read back to Rasulullah to make sure that it was written correctly, and on and on. While in the case of the Hadith, it was more of a Sahaba's own memorization and writings, and it was not supervised by Rasulullah the same way. So now, if enough chains, and when we say chain or the sanad, asnad, they are unique asnad from different parts of the world, even are saying the exact same things, and there are enough chains that it takes away all sorts of doubt that it can have any kind of a corruption in the Hadith. Corruption meaning can be addition or subtraction, whether knowingly or unknowingly. So that's what it means by the mutawatir hadith or the qat'i hadith from the riwayah perspective. If it has not reached that level of tawatur, meaning the decisiveness, then we say the hadith is dhanni. From the reporter's perspective, it does not mean the hadith is, we don't take the hadith anymore. No, the hadith will still be good for different purposes, and it could be just that chain that we are, a specific chain, the hadith we're talking about is dhanni. So it will be used for the ahkam to extract the rulings and stuff, but can it be something be used as a basis of the aqidah or the basis of the usul al-fiqh and stuff like that? That's what the part is where we have to make sure the riwayah and dalalah both have to be qat'i. And inshallah, when we get to the Quran and the Sunnah, when we're discussing that, it will become more clear. Okay. All right.
Assalamu alaikum, Asim bhai.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, my question is that this daleel.
Yes.
I mean, like, why is it important that we categorize daleel as qat'i and zanni? Daleel is, I mean, like, it's in Quran. So as far as daleel is concerned, it is the evidence that It is in the Quran, so it should be qat'i. Why we are categorizing qat'i and zanni? I guess what would be the benefit of it?
So first of all, it cannot be. We can when it comes to the reportage part of the Quran, meaning how it is reported back to us, the Quran, right? That part is qat'i. Sure, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we say this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But like the hadith, the ayah of the Quran, we talked about lamastum an-nisa, that if you touch the woman, that breaks your wudu, or that does it break your wudu, or does it break your ghusl? Meaning you have to take the shower for the tahara, or are you doing the tayammum because it is because you had slept with your wife, or it is just because you have physical, just touch has happened, a regular touch. So it can have two meanings. So that means that the very same ayah can be interpreted as more than one meaning. And at the end, it can end up with two different understandings regarding a hukum, right? So hence, the daleel itself will be considered as dhanni. It has dhan in it, hence it is allowed in that case to have those two different understanding, and each one will be considered as an Islamic understanding. Obviously, the one who does not agree with it and he follows the other one, for him, he will look at his own understanding as a right understanding, ijtihad. And with this understanding, he can be wrong, and he looks at the other's understanding as wrong, but with this understanding that he can be right as well. Okay, so the idea is this, to understand where the ikhtilaf is allowed and where the ikhtilaf is not allowed in Islam. Okay. Well, yeah.
There is a follow-up.
Okay.
To the first question.
Do we take the riwayah up until the muhaddithin like Muslim and Bukhari recorded it? Yes, Imam Muslim and Bukhari, they used to go to the people who had the hadith, and they would collect the hadith from them, and then they would ask for the chain from whom they have heard the hadith, and this whole chain has to go back to, if the hadith is marfu', meaning that goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then the chain has to go back to that, and then there has to, you look at all aspects of that specific chain, all the narrators in the chain. You look at it, for example, the strength of those narrators, whether they are thiqah, they are trustworthy or not, how is their memory, they are dabt or not, adl, they are just or not, as a whole, if they're thiqah or not. And if there is some weaknesses in those reporters, wherever, of course, we consider all the Sahaba, the whole generation of Sahaba as adl, they are all thiqah, but they are all adl, and there is no issue over there. But the other generations, there can be mistakes done by them, and then over there, we each one will be checked by the muhaddith until up to the person that he heard from. This is why when you read the hadith that is say Rawahu Muslim, Rawahu Bukhari, that reported by Bukhari or Muslim, so then he tells from whom he collected from, and then he gives a whole chain that says, like, for example, an, and all those from, he heard from him and him and him, and then qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying something, or naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited something, and on and on. But so that's what it means by the reported, yes. And I mean, I am very simplifying it. Inshallah, when we can get to the point of the ahadith, the categorization of the ahadith, it will become more clear, inshallah. Okay. Okay. You see the time. So I'll just go through very quickly here. When it comes to sources of hukum shari, these two slides, and we'll stop, inshallah. But when it comes to hukum shari, as we have discussed from the beginning of the talk regarding Usul Fiqh, hukum shari are the rulings from Allah Azza wa Jal that, or this is a khitab shara, which is Allah Azza wa Jal, the address of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, regarding our actions, afar al-ibad, and they have to be driven from certain sources, right? And the sources which are used to extract the rulings have to be based on adilla qat'iyya. Adilla qat'iyya means these are decisive evidences, and there are 4 definitive sources of the hukum shari: Quran, Sunnah, Ijma Sahaba, and Qiyas. Does not mean that there are other scholars do not disagree, or they have other sources as well they use. But these are the four that which is in general agreed upon by all, except very few that have the issue of the qiyas. But in general, it is agreed upon by all. Okay, which is Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, Sahaba, and Qiyas. Quran is Quran, we know. Sunnah is the actions of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, sayings of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and taqreer, or the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw an action and he approved of an action, or he stays silent, which is the approval of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And consensus of Sahaba means Ijma Sahaba, that all the Sahaba agreed upon something, an action. And we will talk about the definitions of this and some of the examples of this later on as well. And then the fourth one is analogy, which is the qiyas. And qiyas is based of the hukum that exists in the Quran and Sunnah, and then it is the parallel hukum made based on the illah, or the reason behind the hukum. So that's these are the four definitive sources. When it comes to the sources of hukum shari, which are not agreed upon by all ulama, there are some of them are mentioned here because these are based on because the sources have to be based on adillah qat'iyya, but in this case they are not. Since they are not, the following seven are some of the examples mentioned here. There are some of them more than that as well, and some of them have multiple categories. Like when you talk about ijma sahaba, that's agreed upon. Everybody agrees upon, even the one who agree upon the other kind of ijma, because ijma sahaba is on top anyways. So some of the ulama, they say ijma ummah, or the consensus of the ummah, can be used as a source of evidence. Some say ijma al-mujtahidin, the one who have the knowledge of doing the ijtihad, their ijma consensus can be considered as the source of as one of source of hukum shari. Or ijma ahlul bayt, which is the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, their consensus. Or ijma al-Madina. Somehow I mentioned that Ahlul Bayt in Arabic is Ijma al-Madina. Ijma Ahl al-Madina, the people of the Medina. And besides that, some of the scholars, they looked at, they took istihsan also as one of the sources of hukum shari, and we will talk about that as well later on. Masalih wa mursalah. And the laws revealed before Islam, meaning the different prophets who came prior to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was Sharia they came with. Can we take them as sources of evidences or not? And these are all the seven which are mentioned here. These are the non-definitive sources. These do not have the adillah qat'iyya, hence this should not be used. But there are scholars who use them, and they have their own reasoning. And inshallah, we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay. So as far as coverage goes, that's all I wanted to cover today. We will talk about the Quran, inshallah, next week. But if there is any questions or comments regarding the subject covered, inshallah, I'll try to answer in the rest of the time we have. Okay. And there's another part I'd like to mention about, actually that's about the Quran and the Hadith even. Even for the Quran, many of the Huffaz of the Quran, they will tell you that the whole chain from whom that they have memorized the Quran from. So for example, whoever they learned from, he will tell you that who he learned from, and on until Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the chain goes up to like that. And similarly for the hadith as well, the ones who learned the hadith from the scholars of the hadith, even for example, when I was learning from my teachers, they used to give us the whole chain that would go back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether it was 39, 40 or 45 different generations. Their names are there that they learned from each other and conveyed the hadith like this. So it was not just only written like that, but even taught like that.
So there's one question.
Yes.
on the chat.
So question is, if the four legislative sources are based on decisive evidence, why is there a disagreement on qiyas amongst the ulama? It's very few which are not considered as, the thing is not that disagreement or agreement. Even the ones which there is a disagreement, they are, they consider, they came with the evidences they presented as if this is decisive, but it's not. Now, in this case, they did not take it. And when we get to the qiyas, inshallah, I cannot recall the why they did not take it at this point, so I'm not going to answer that. But inshallah, when we get to qiyas, we'll talk about that as well.
So Asim, Assalamu alaikum. So to do qiyas, do you have to be mujtahid?
Qiyas means you're talking about extract. Qiyas is you're ruling using the qiyas to extract the rule, right? So you have to have knowledge, enough knowledge to understand how to extract the ruling. What are the, for example, on the language, and you have to know how to do the qiyas. For example, what are the existing rulings that exist? Which of the texts that can be used for the qiyas, and for what reality you're using it for. So you have to be mujtahid at the end to have this. When you are trying to extract a rule, you have to have you have to be a mujtahid to do that. Yes. There are different categories of the mujtahideen, though, and inshallah we'll talk about that as well as the time comes. Okay, the question is from the previous session, that excessive means, what does excessive mean in the ayah from Al-A'raf? Is it to waste food? Look, you will find two different meanings. So sometimes people try to say excessive means, for example, if I am buying a car which is more expensive than there's a cheaper car available, so is that considered as wasting the money or not? So about that, it is clear that israf actually refers to the meaning that if the money is used in the haram meaning. Now, about wasting the food, of course, wasting the food is not something should be done. There are people who can benefit from the food who do not have enough to eat. So that should be given, it should be looked into from that perspective. Of course, wasting the food in general, just for the sake of wasting, is not allowed. But in general, israf is referred to something which is used for haram means. Okay. All right, we're reaching the 10 o'clock mark as well. So inshallah, if there's no other question, we'll stop here.
Yeah, no other questions.
Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. جزاك الله خير.
وعليكم السلام.
Yeah.